Good evening, good evening, good evening, and welcome to the virtual California African American Museum. For those of you I have not yet had the pleasure to meet, my name is Alexandra Mitchell. I'm delighted to be the Manager of Education and Public Programs here at CAM. This evening, we're joined for In Conversation, featuring Maria Elena Ortiz, who will moderate a discussion between two wonderful artists in their own right, April Bey and Jewelle Gomez. We are celebrating the opening of B's solo exhibition at CAM entitled Atlantica, the Gilda Region. In this exhibition, um, April Bey, who is a Bahamian-American artist, positions herself as an alien from the planet Atlantica. Her mission on Earth is to observe and report as an undercover agent. Bey's mythological realm is inspired in part by author Jewelle Gomez's Lambda award-winning novel, The Gilda Stories. April Bey grew up in the Bahamas and now resides and works here in Los Angeles as a visual artist and arts educator. Her interdisciplinary artwork is an introspective and social critique of American and Bahamian culture, contemporary pop culture, feminism, generational theory, social media, Afrofuturism, Afro-surrealism, post-colonialism, and constructs of race within supremacist systems. Bey has also exhibited internationally and is currently a tenured professor at Glendale College. The second artist we are privileged to have join us is Jewelle Gomez, activist, writer, and author of The Gilda Stories, which is currently celebrating its 30th anniversary. So happy anniversary to that book. Um, Ms. Gomez is a recipient of the Literature Fellowship from the National Endowment for the Arts, two California Arts Council fellowships, and an individual commission from the San Francisco Arts Commission. Her fiction, essays, criticism, and poetry have appeared in many diverse and prestigious periodicals from the New York Times and Miss Magazine to the Village Voice. Formerly the executive director of the Poetry Center and the American Poetry Archives, she has also worked diligently in the philanthropic world in the areas of literature, cultural diversity, and the arts at many great institutions, such as the New York State Council on the Arts. Our moderator this evening is the perfect choice to lead this conversation. María Elena Ortiz is currently a curator at the Pérez Art Museum Miami, where she is spearheading the Caribbean Cultural Institute. At PAM, Ortiz has organized several exhibitions, including Fairleigh Baez's Bloodlines. She also has contributed to writing platforms such as the Davidoff Art Initiative, Terremoto Magazine, and many others. Ortiz's curatorial practice is informed by the connections between Latinx, Latin American, and the Black communities in the US and the Caribbean. As you know, you may use the question and answer feature at the bottom of your screen to engage tonight's guest. And without further ado, I turn the conversation over to Maria.
Hi, good evening, everyone. Thank you so much, Alexandra, for your lovely introduction, and also it's for Cam for the invitation. It's a privilege for me to be here tonight, surrounded with such strong women. Jewelle Gomez, who is an icon and who has created one of the most kind of impressive books of a generation. And of course, April Bey, congratulations on your show. It's so exciting to be here celebrating you and your exhibition. I wanted to, yeah, yeah. So I wanted to start a little bit, just because for those who have not read the book, I wanted to make sure that you know just a little bit about it. It was published in 1991, and it's a Black lesbian vampire novel, and often it's described as a combination of Toni Morrison's Beloved with Anne Rice's Interview with a Vampire. And it starts in Louisiana in the 1850s, where a Black girl who's a slave, who's an enslaved Black woman, escapes a plantation and that gets turned into a vampire by the madame of a brothel. And then you see her life in a 200-year span. So it's a very compelling and very engaging and immersive novel that deals with like the feminism, found family, racism, Black identity, and you just get this portrayal of a very strong Black woman, which is just very nice for all of us to know and see about. So I wanted to start a little bit with you, Jewelle, with April. This exhibition is inspired by your work. So I was wondering, what was your first reaction once you knew this was happening?
My first reaction when I heard about the exhibit, I was flabbergasted and honored. The biggest tragedy for me right now is that I can't be in Los Angeles to see it. But from all I have heard, it's extraordinary. I feel really honored to have created a story, a set of characters and a landscape that has had such a lasting effect in the culture and has had an effect on such an artist as April. I feel really moved by that, really moved.
And April, like, what inspired you from Jewelle's work to create this exhibition?
It's world building 101, character development. Like it's the ideas around Black womanhood really, as far as like being human but not being human, the expectations, wanting to be resilient and strong, but even in that identity still having weaknesses. So like the main character at one point, she's a vampire, right? And she can actually, kill anyone. She has the power to do that. But at the same time, she's walking alone on the street at night and she's still a Black woman. So it's like that dichotomy throughout the book was really interesting. And I relate that to my show, and that a lot of the people in my show embody that conflict of seeing good in humanity and not being able to leave it alone, but at the same time recognizing that there's some very toxic things going on and it's hard to be fully in and fully invested. And then also the feeling of not really being human or feeling human, or what the definition of that is, through so many different lenses, like the queer lens, the feminist lens, and dare I say womanist lens. And I think the way the book ended spurred me to start creating my own world, because we know that they all, I don't want to ruin the book, but everyone should have read it by now. But there's another world that started at the end, and I found myself fixated on that and what that means within that world of vampirism. And the characters she builds too, there's like factions of vampires that don't just kill people, right? There's a reciprocity behind being fulfilled. And I liked that idea, especially in relation to Black women and how we give so much, and then we have to articulate what we need back, if at all, if we get it all at all. And I liked that relationship between the characters in the book, and it related very well to my own work and my own identity, and how the whole idea of being an alien from another planet came from my father trying to explain why Black people look different than white people, why I look different. And I just thought the speculative fiction genre is obviously where my heart lies, and science fiction and Afrofuturism. But after reading the book several times, it's a space for me to draw out many different meanings over and over, because the character development is so good, along with all of the other things that she doesn't allow you to forget. Like even though we're living all of these multiple lives, there's still the threat of racism and sexism and ageism and all of the isms that this one force who has to live through it all has to contend with and can't quite leave alone.
Yeah, that was something, Jewelle, that did caught my attention, or like the first time I read the book, that got me thinking about this idea of which April touched upon right now, that how Gilda is like super, she's beyond human, she has all this power, yet she can still not escape the judgment that people put on her body and on her skin, even though that she can kill them all if she wanted to. And I was wondering if, like, your reaction to that, like, kind of, because I was wondering, I don't know, I was wondering about that tension.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Well, I think I used Gilda to explore the complications that most of us feel most of the time. And for someone like Gilda, who has been the most oppressed, a slave woman where nothing belongs to her, nothing is within her power, not her body, not her children, not her heart or her labor. What happens for someone like that when they gain the largest power there is, power over life and death? And how do we keep from being as cruel and hateful as those who have dominated and brutalized us? I think we're seeing that every day for those of us who move into spaces bigger than the ones we started in. What is our behavior that's going to be different from our oppressors? And I think that's a big question that we're often asking ourselves, either consciously or unconsciously. So, as a lesbian feminist, I wanted to weave that through the answers that Gilda was going to have to find for herself. And, it's a strange sensibility to be human, but not mortal. You feel all these things, but you do have that control over your life and your death. And I wanted to build the idea of a family of vampires who understand that power, who really believe in reciprocity. To take blood, they have to leave something in exchange, and they're not going to be killing people just willy-nilly. That I wanted to create a sense of responsibility with that power. And I spent a lot of time thinking about it, philosophically, what that would do and how that made my vampires different from, say, Dracula or any of the others. And that was a lot of fun for me to think about. And it really is great that it affected April as well, that she keyed into those feelings and complexities of the characters.
Do you think, April, that the characters that you create in your works, if we see the show, there's all these different people, that they share that sensibility that Jewelle was describing?
Yeah, and then I was gonna bring up the queer family, right? So a lot of the people in my show are my chosen family. They're people that really inspire me. They all work in different disciplines. It's so wild, but we share values and brought up C. And we're on the same goal path, right? I'm always told by wiser people to keep the same company of people who are on the same goal path, right? And the goals can be different, but we're all on the same path to the goals. And that's what I got from the Gilda stories, even though she often had to tear herself away from the people she cared about if they couldn't go with her. They all had things about them that she was attracted to. They had the best parts of humanity in them, like they were really into philanthropy, for example. That's enough to make her fall in love with humanity all over again. And for me, like all of these beings, so we're all Atlanticans in the show, right? So all of us beings, we have the same goal path with the same value system in line and in play. We help each other out. We believe that like the only way the community can rise together is if we just perpetually keep helping each other out, because one way or another, we're also marginalized in some way. And every time we make 2 steps forward, something happens. And we have to deal with a system that's designed for a certain group of people to succeed and not really caring about others. And so we only have each other. And so that vampire subculture world family really reminded me of the queer chosen family, which is what a lot of people, at least in my circle, that's what we are leaning into. Not that given family is horrible or anything. I'm not saying that. I'm just saying it's the idea of connecting with people that share your outlook on life and also share like where you're wanting to go. Like we all want to get on a spaceship and we all want to leave. So let's talk about what that planet's going to be like before we get there. Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting to me how both of you approach time in a different way. Like, yeah, you're thinking about the future and this kind of created world, April. But then in Jewelle's work, you know, there's a love for history, right? There's a love for ancestry and like this idea that we're all part of a historical narrative, right? So I was wondering if you both can speak a little bit about those approaches and where you guys see intersection, specifically to also portraying the perspective of Black women, feminism, you know, from a queer perspective and so on.
Oh, I'll go first. You know, I was raised by my great-grandmother, who had been born on Indian land in 1883. And I lived with her until 1971. So I got a perspective from her looking at the world from this long view. And that really affected me. And the idea that here is this woman, my great-grandmother, who could have been born and living in a place where there were no cars, there were no, you know, televisions. And then I'm sitting with her watching an astronaut land on the moon. So the whole concept of time is really different if you can get yourself to think long term. And living with her, I felt that, and it made me pay attention, I think, to history. And that's one of the things I think is valuable for the book, because you get to see how Black women and women of color existed in this country for the previous several hundred years, and how it was different each time. A short story, I did a reading from the book once on a college campus. And I, you know, when I read on college campuses or anywhere really, I always try to read a section where Gilda is capturing the blood from someone, because that's, you know, that's what everybody wants to know. And so I happened to read two sections. And one of the students at the Q&A said to me, you know, it doesn't look like Gilda likes men very much, because she's always taking blood from men. And I was a little bit puzzled. I didn't understand really, but then I realized, because of the two sections I had read, I said, well, number one, it wouldn't mean that she didn't like men, because she doesn't kill them. That's not how her process works. And she leaves people something in exchange, something that's helpful and thoughtful. I said, but the reality, which you should actually note, is before the 1960s, for the most part, women were never alone on the street at night. And he looked at me as if I had just made that up, because it was so foreign to him. And I said, no, if you look back through history, you will see for a long time, number one, women were not allowed to be alone on the streets at night. And then it really wasn't safe for women to be alone on the streets at night. It wasn't really until the 60s and the different social movements that changed. So naturally, the people she would take blood from are men who are alone on the street at night. And it was as if I had opened up a whole world about women for this young man that had never occurred to him. And I feel that's one of the valuable things that fiction can do, particularly when it's spread over, you know, centuries, so that people can see what it's like for women to be in a world that's hostile, you know. So.
Brilliant. So time. So I really like the Afrofuturist aesthetic in that it combines high tradition with new media and new ideas. Um, I'm thinking aesthetically of a short film. It's called Afronaut. Spelled like astronaut, only Afronaut. And it has like, I don't want to give it away because I think it's a beautiful film that has a nice little ending, but it's a black and white short film. And it shows a village of people attempting to send a little girl to the moon using trash. And I think it takes place in Zambia or Namibia. I think it's Namibia. Anyway, the whole short film has like this juxtaposition between like futurism and new sterile tech versus that tech being made out of like foil and car parts. And I like the idea of thinking of history and time and the present and the future on one continuum, that we can use the past to validate the present and warn those in the present, but also to start forming the aesthetic and aid in the aesthetic of the future. And for me in my work, I really get depressed by the past and the present because I feel like the present just is kind of gliding along, not really learning anything from the past. And I'm also a teacher, and I see a lot in my students, they want to make something new that no one's ever done before. And I'm like, everything's been done before. It's how you do it that changes it. And so in that sense, I try to just create what I want to see. Like in my world, fat, dark-skinned Black femmes are like the president. Like and that's not crazy. Do you know what I mean? Like that's just what it is. Like we wake up and that's just what it is. We don't have to have a special holiday for it. It's not abnormal. And it's kind of how I am in my personality too. When things don't work for me, I get frustrated and I don't ask again. I just go somewhere else until I get told what I want to hear. And I just get frustrated being on this planet without having a backup plan to say, okay, well, there's another timeline in which this doesn't even exist. There's another timeline in which race doesn't exist, gender doesn't exist. We can be turquoise if we want to, or see-through. We can duplicate ourselves, we can clone ourselves. Like that gives me fuel to tolerate where I'm at now. But also science fiction is a precursor to reality too. A lot of, like me, for example, I could be inspired by something and that work on that inspiration so hard, and my passion so hard around that inspiration that it actually becomes real when the original inspiration was considered fiction at the time. And I'm really attracted to that as far as how that can impact linear time and by extension history as well, if that made sense.
Yeah.
I like thinking of the past, like just because I think that like there's a lot of stories to be told that were not told, you know, like, and especially stories of resilience and of Black females. And, you know, that's just one group that's been oppressed that, you know, so I think that I do enjoy that because we are here because others have also been building strength because our communities have been oppressed and since they got to this world, right? To this, the new world. Or even probably back when when they caught some of us to be sold in the new world. So that being said, I wanted to talk a little bit about this idea that was mentioned earlier about how Black women are meant to give. Because I think that one of the hardest things, or one thing that I've been learning myself now, is when not to give, when to kind of realize, you know what, I'm going to give 110%. So X and Y and C person doesn't deserve right now my 110%. I rather use that for another situation. So I was just wondering, you know, in each of your individual works, those types of ideas.
Oh, yeah. it's a very hard thing to break out of your programming, and I think women in general and women of color specifically have really been almost always raised to be the caretaker. You're meant to put yourself at the end of the line, and everything else should come before you. And we see that in every political movement. I mean, there is a reason that more people are going to know who Dr. Martin Luther King is, and he should be known. But more people are going to know him than are going to know Fannie Lou Hamer or are going to know Barbara Jordan. Because the women doing the work always end up in the shadow and, opening the door and letting someone else go in front of them. And that's in just about every movement that has happened and continues to happen. You can't, unless you fight against that programming, that since a child, it's very hard. It's very hard. And, I think a lot of, therapy, I mean, I've had a lot of therapy. I will say that openly. And it took a lot for me to understand that sometimes it was actually healthy and not selfish to put yourself first. It was really important. And I mean, one of the things that fascinates me about April's work is this idea of getting a perspective. And that's what therapy tries to do, is getting an outside perspective on the scene. So if it takes aliens to come onto the scene and assess what's going on, then that's what we really, really need. Someone who is outside, which is what a therapist is, someone who's outside of the scene to tell you, girlfriend, let that situation go. You can't do anything about it. Move along. And I think, with aliens, they could be in the same position because they can see the fuller picture. That's my thought.
Yeah, so aliens, that's how I help my students explain their projects sometimes, because when I've worked with them for a month and I know what they're good at, what their ideas are, when it comes time for their final, they're just like, oh, you remember that one time I did that one thing? And I'm like, no, you need to explain it to me like I'm an alien from another planet. And they're like, oh, so you just don't know? I'm like, I don't know anything. I don't even know what species you are. I don't know what purple is. Can you explain what a ruler is? What's glitter? And it makes them like go back and break everything down to explain it. And it helps them with, the audience, right? Once they put their work out there. And I've always liked that idea of trying to look at things as innocently and basic as possible to help myself in communicating with people. And that foreign observe and report also was like you feel some type of way when you're in a position to observe and report, where you're the voyeur, and you also have a certain type of morality stance at the same time. And I think that's what I try to bring into my work, that it's like the aliens that I'm doing portraits of, they're still humanoid. There are things that are different about them. Like, sometimes we misuse Earth imagery because we just think it's cute. So we think the royal crown packaging is cute, so we're going to make a crown out of it, even though it's a hair product that you put on your hair, right? But there's still human aspects to the way they're presented. And that is acknowledging that, yes, we're observing and recording. I'm observing and reporting, but I can't deny the fact that I grew up in a, former British colony, and still had to come to the US to learn a lot of things. Like before I came to the US, I thought the British were saviors. And like were the best thing ever. I was like, this is amazing. They civilized my ancestors. I'm so happy for that they're a thing. And then I came to the US and I took, actual history outside of a colonial school system. And I was like, wow, like there's a lot of stuff I didn't know. In high school, I got obsessed with taking specialty history classes just to learn about wars and all of the conflicts. And every conflict has that dichotomy of, oh my God, that's what human beings are capable of. But at the same time, I'm a human being. Like, what does that mean? What kind of power do I have to influence that? And I think that's why I take the third person of being another character, another species, while at the same time mirroring what I'm seeing and the humanity in it. Did I answer your question? I feel like I didn't answer your question at all, actually.
It's okay. I mean, I think that it will be also nice to kind of, I haven't seen the show, so it'll be also nice to perhaps those ideas that you just mentioned to help us like take us inside the exhibition and yeah.
I'm sorry. I have to respond, April, to your that feeling of growing up in a colony and thinking the British were your saviors. I grew up in Boston in the 50s. It was like growing up in a British colony. Let me just say, the Brahmin Bostonians acted like, it was really a mistake. We didn't mean to break away from England.
Oh my gosh.
And yes, and it wasn't until I got to college really that I began to understand. I like those British accents, but those are the people who tortured us. So yeah, it's kind of funny.
Well, if we're sharing experience of colonies,
Yeah,
I'm from
right.
Puerto Rico and we're still a colony. And I remember, I had the opposite. Like I had friends that when I moved to the US, they were like, I cannot believe you're moving to the empire,
Yeah.
like you're moving to, and they would call me a petite Yankee,
Oh,
like, because it was like, it's
Yeah.
still a very, since the political relationship is still so unfair,
Right.
It's still very present, right? Very
Yeah.
lived.
Yeah. I mean, the colonialism is still going on around the world. It is so, it's like you can't believe it. It's like it's the 21st century.
Yeah.
And still people are acting like it's the 19th century.
Yeah. Which kind of takes me to the end of the book, where, they're hunting vampires. And in a way, I kind of wanted to also throw this question to both of you, because I was talking to April yesterday and she was saying, or asking, she wanted to ask you, I believe, did they arrive at a utopia? And I was also wondering on April's work, like, does utopia play a role within this world that you're creating?
Wow. Well, I went back and forth with the ending of the book. And my publisher, editor, Nancy Bariano, who ran Firebrand Books, she had some real deep questions about utopia. What is the utopia? And she asked me a really significant question, which was, what would it be like for a Native American to leave the planet when Native Americans had already been rounded up, hunted down, boxed in? And so the bird character, would that character who is Lakota be that eager to get on a ship and go to another planet, even if it was possible, as a way to escape the oppression and violence of the dominant culture? So I had to think about it a lot. And so I ultimately decided that some people would go, but that Bird and Gilda, once they got to Machu Picchu, of course, you don't know this because I'm still working on the sequel. And Bird basically says, I have a different relationship to this land. You, as an African, were brought to this country away from your own land, but this was my land, and I really don't want to leave it to those horrible people. And so the story, moves on from there with a decision to fight, to struggle, to seduce the country back. And I do think of it as seducing the country back. It's how do you win over the hearts of the people who are still there, and win them over to the principles that they really thought the country was founded on, but never got lived out fully, got corrupted. So I don't believe in utopia. I feel like whatever we get, we're going to have to struggle for. And it's never going to be perfect, but it's going to be something different.
Yeah, I always tell people that Atlantica isn't perfect, it's different.
Yeah.
So like our biggest issues are like fighting a war over chicken wings, whether bone in is better than boneless.
Yeah.
So that's like the tongue-in-cheek aspect of Atlantica, like, but it's like, if you, I'll give a metaphor, like you grow up on an island, there's always going to be sand in your bed. Like no matter how many times you wash the sheets, how many times you shake your feet before you get in, there's always going to be sand in the bed. So the idea of a utopia has never seemed realistic to me. And my friends know I'm the type of person that will have a backup plan for my backup plan to back up my backup plan. And that the idea that something could be perfect without me working really hard to make it that way is very disconcerting. And that's just me. So now I'm like having to rely on the other people living in my clean utopia, like that they're not going to get sand in my bed. I think just accepting that's not a reality is bringing me closer to the feeling of utopia, like more of a calm than the expectation that anything such could exist. So I feel like when I present Atlantica a lot to people, I want them to remember that it's a name of a planet that didn't have a name, that was used by my dad to explain why people don't like Black people. and that's not a perfect way to have the talk. But it was a functional way at the time, because all we knew was Star Trek and science fiction, and that was the easiest way to explain, why someone would make fun of my hair. So that's the way I approach moving on. It's better than, and it's other than, but it's not perfect.
I love that phrase. I just wrote it down. There's always going to be sand in my bed. I love that.
The other thing I also appreciate about both of your work is that, Black is not a monolith in the writing or in the visual arts. So I was also wondering your thoughts on that, given that, even this conversation, it's a very diverse group of women, of Black women who are kind of gathering together.
Yeah, that's the thing. Like sometimes when I give talks, non-Black people will ask me if white people are allowed on Atlantica, because all they see in my work is Black people. And I'm like, well, not really. I mean, the thing is, like, we don't have white people on Atlantica because the concept of white people isn't a thing. When I think of white people, I'm not thinking of aesthetics, so to speak. I'm thinking of a power structure, and I'm thinking of people who lean into that power structure. So if that's not you, then are you white? Like, how much belief do I have to put into that label? Because if you don't believe that concept exists, which is definitely the narrative on Atlantica, then it just doesn't exist. Like it's not a thing. Or they'll say, do I need a passport to come to Atlantica? I'm like, we don't have any concept of immigration or social security numbers, because like our currency is so far in abundance that there's no poverty. So it's definitely, there's always going to be conflict everywhere, as we just said, but I want the biggest conflict on my planet to be between, like, or is it brunch or breakfast? Like, is there alcohol involved or not?
Yeah. The rainbow of possibilities for Black people is so infinite that it's hard for me to understand why non-Black people don't get it. And I know that if you have been kept estranged from each other as whites and Blacks, or Puerto Ricans, or any different cultures, if you kept estranged from each other, it's hard for you to recognize the differences in the other group because you haven't had experience with them. But I don't get it. I don't get it that you could, literally somebody could look at the three of us in these screens and then can't remember who was who. So as I was writing, and I knew that Gilda was going to have a 200-year journey, I was very conscious of her, the kinds of people she encountered as she was having her journey, and the different ethnicities, different shades. And in fact, one of the mistakes that I made in my writing, that now when I look back on it, I was too subtle. So that the first character the girl meets, the woman who rescues her, I describe her physically, and I talk about her being pale and this and whatnot. And then later on, she describes the land that she came from. And I didn't do it strong enough so that people understood at the end of the story, when they are going to Machu Picchu, that they are actually returning to the land that the first Gilda was born in, and that she is not white. And because of my description of her, people assumed that she was white. And even though she describes how she almost died because of the lack of water, and they're going towards the rivers and stuff, it didn't connect. And that was a fault on mine in terms of the writing.
That makes so much sense, because I always wonder, why would she turn to her? Like, why would she rescue? Like, I don't know. Like, I couldn't see, like, I was wondering, like, where was it was a deeper connection,
Yeah.
But
yeah.
The way you're describing it, I was like, oh yeah, she also understands, the narrative of difference and oppression in a way.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Yeah. And, of course, when they reprinted the new version, I wanted to go back and fix it. But we couldn't, because, I wrote it originally so long ago, I don't even have the floppy disks that it was written on. So I couldn't go back. The cost of going back to fix it was so extraordinary. I just said, okay, well, I have to let it go, and then I'll tell everybody, the truth. But she was originally from Peru, so when she becomes a vampire, and maybe I should write in this sequel, I should write a little bit of her story, that predates even her finding the girl and turning her into a vampire. That's a thought. I have to think about that.
I like that.
Yeah. Yeah, the pre-story. Because there are so many stories of oppression that we all come from, And my fantasy is that we can bring those different stories and paths together and really reinvent the idea of power and survival. That's what I like to think is possible.
Yeah, I like it. And I think that, in the last couple of years, those questions about power has been so present, giving all the movement of social justice and so on. That I do think it's important to think about all this historical moments, because it's sometimes I wonder how we forgot, even for the new generation, have we forgotten about certain things? Let's not make the same mistakes, etc. I do want to remind the audience that you can drop questions in the Q&A. I actually received a couple, so I want to just put them out there since we're all in conversation. Somebody asked, why not write a prequel?
Well, see, we already answered that question. Why not? I think it's an idea that could fit with what I'm writing. Actually, it's not even a sequel. What I'm writing is chapters that take place in Gilda's experience in between the chapters that are in the original novel. So like the first chapter takes place in 1850, and then in the original novel, and then the next chapter takes place in 1890, I think. So I'm going to write a story that takes place between 1850 and 1890 and sort of hopscotch through the novel, through Gilda's experience. So I could, in fact, start with the original character, Gilda, and how she got where she ends up in New Orleans. That could be really interesting. Thank you.
We have another question by Kevin Webb. He says, as a white person, I'm aware of the privilege I have, but how do I talk to, say, a Black person about the oppression they have suffered for centuries?
That's a whole class. We can do a whole section on that. And April has taught, and I'm sure has different approaches. I know when I have taught classes, the thing that I try to do is to get everyone to be aware of their own cultural history and feel embedded in that history, so that you have an understanding of how the world works for and against people. So it's not totally alien to you when you're looking at a person of color who's been oppressed and has certain, I think of African Americans as still having PTSD from slavery and Jim Crow. I think when I'm working with writing students and I ask the students to tell me about their history, I want the Irish Americans to tell me about what happened in Ireland and how the British oppressed you. I want Italian Americans to talk about their culture and how in this country, Italian Americans weren't counted as white for a very long time. I think we've all got a history. Jews were slaves for thousands of years. So we've all in this world have histories that can make us empathetic with each other. And I think the place to begin is to explore your history and see where it has been oppressive and where it has been oppressed, so that the empathy grows out of you naturally.
Yeah. And I would say, I think, I've gotten this question a lot actually, but the thing is, like, if you're really friends with someone who's Black, then they will share with you when things are not great. Mm-hmm. And I also think if you have an authentic relationship with someone who's Black, you'll know that it's better to ask questions like, what do you need right now? Rather than feel that it's your right to cherry pick their brains on how they're feeling about something traumatic, right? So if you remove race just for a second and you're just thinking about a friend who might have broken their leg or has a parent that's sick in the hospital, what would you do in that situation? We would definitely think that maybe they don't want to talk about it right now. Maybe they're dealing with stuff around it and they're stressed out. So what would you do? Like, would you send them food without asking and that's a great surprise? Or would you ask them, what do you need? Here's what I can do for you. Here's what I'm available to do for you. Because I think if you're asking how to approach the subject with pre-existing Black friends, then maybe you need to consider that it hasn't come up yet because they don't consider you safe to talk to. And that's a reality. And it's not something that you're entitled to either. So if you look at it from just a humanist perspective, like I love you and I can see that you're struggling. Why don't you feel comfortable speaking with me? Like what is that about first and foremost? And what can I do for you? What do you need? Because I know like this past summer, there were people messaging me so much and I was just like, some of them I had never talked to in like so long. And then others, it just felt like they wanted me to do the labor of like appeasing them. And I was like, like a lot of these things, these memes and stuff that you're reading, you've done. You've petted me before, you've petted my hair, you've done all of these things. And I know that we grow, right? But I think it's important to recognize that if you're thinking about it now, that someone in your life is struggling and you don't know how to approach them, maybe it's okay to consider that they don't feel safe even bringing that to you.
But I want to add there that not to take that personal, because sometimes it has nothing to do with you. Like I've had the experience where I may have not talked about it with certain people, not because I don't like them or trust them, it's because you get turned down so much, especially when you're growing up, that you also learn to, okay, this is a conversation for a specific type of person. I'm not going to delve into this because I don't want to be rejected, or I don't want to, I may not get what I'm seeking for. And I had a personal experience a couple years ago that somebody told me. I remember once when you try to bring this topic when we were in high school, and I had forgotten about it, but then I was, and that we dismissed you. And I wanted to apologize for that because I always remember that. And then I was like, oh, talking about this now, it's a moment when you realize, yes, when you grow up, because sometimes you start having some of these questions and feelings often when you're a child, and you cannot even express that to a friend, then you learn to just, let me not go there with everybody, because they just not gonna listen. So I would also say to the person that asks questions, don't take that personally, because it probably doesn't have to do with you. It has to do with more of a history of oppression, that you learn strategies on how to maneuver it
I mean, I think one of the interesting things we're seeing today with the backlash against Asian Americans, which is, again, who are these crazy people that have suddenly decided that they can do all this stuff against Asian Americans? And I think Asian Americans are in a specific kind of bind because they've always been touted as, the model minority. And it almost was just like taking away their humanity in a way. That they are this several different stereotypes that Americans, Black and white, could view. And clearly they don't have any emotional responses to racism, or they're not subject to it. And I think all of us are too easily captured with this idea that others are not feeling the same as we're feeling. And I think that's what, if you're not a person of color, to really focus on the fact that the other, whoever the other is probably feeling exactly the same things you would be feeling if you were in the situation. You don't have to imagine something else. Just think about how you would feel in a way.
I have another question here. It says, I heard Ms. Gomez say once, revolution needs to be upheld by each generation. I love this. How can we support less extrovert elders who want to participate but have expressed feeling excluded due to our culture's focus on young people? How do we encourage the participation, if that makes sense?
Yeah, you know, as a elder at this point in my life, someone did say to me, well, you know, you all baby boomers, you dropped the ball, you just, you know, you did as much as you wanted and then you let go of everything. And I said, well, wait a minute, I think it's like a relay race. Each generation gets to pick up the baton and do the work. And as you get older and you're less physically agile and you're less, have less energy, I tend to think of activism in different ways. You know, like I work, there's a group called Old Lesbians Organizing for Change, of which I am a member. It's a national organization, and they do gatherings every couple of years, and they do lots of consciousness raising with others. I think there are enough at this point organizations working with elders who are progressive that you can always find things to do. You can always find activism to participate in. You do not have to go down to the courthouse and chain yourself to the gate and then not be able to get back up. You do not have to put yourself in a physical danger where you feel you're insecure. But I think there are enough organizations at this point that are focused on older people, because baby boomers, that would be me, there's a lot of us. It's a very big population. And we did come through very activist periods with the anti-war movement, the women's movement, civil rights, Black Power, the Green movement. So, and a lot of us still are activists in our own right. So I don't think you have to put yourself in the same place that young people are if you don't feel that comfortable. And I think you can find ways to be activists with other people who are elders. We're out here. We're out here.
There's a question that was here for me, but I think that you guys can also answer it from your own perspective. The question is, how do you think art history and criticism is currently being written about artists like April Bey? Is there still a translation of artists of color and difference into white normative art history? I'll answer it from my point of view, but I think that probably both can also answer it from your both perspectives. I would say that in the last, 10 years or so, maybe 20, there's been, of course, influx of institutions, curators, and artists who have been actively fighting to include diverse voices into, kind of like the canon of our history, right? But I do think there's like a lot work to be done. And we also have to be very careful because first of all, if you look at history, these waves of inclusion have always been there. They've always been there. They always, that's the way the Studio Museum was created. That's the way the Museo del Barrio was created. That's probably what's also propelling my museum here in Miami. But, often these initiatives tend to, kind of go away. And also often I find it benefits one group. And what I mean by that often diversity in this country, especially in businesses, means that you have a board that is, let's say, 3% diverse, and we're all trying to diversify 3% of our exhibitions. But that 3% is fought between Latinos, African Americans, indigenous groups. So there's not like a real, broad transformation of inclusion. It's just like that little percentage. And depending on the trend, then that's the minority who is kind of being marketed. So I do think that we have to be very careful about how we're including narratives, and very conscious that this is not new, and that this is going to, how do we make it more permanent, or how do we have like greater impact? And I also think that there's a lot of work to be done on the other side of history. And what I mean is, for example, an artist like April, or a lot of Caribbean artists, sometimes they're alluding to African religions, you know, they're alluding to indigenous practices. And there's very little, or there's more knowledge to be made or access of that type of content. Like perhaps we don't need to focus so much on how, you know, somebody like Raphael Lambda, the painter, is alluding to, you know, modern painting, European modern painting, but actually who are the deities, the African deities that he's very much referencing in his painting, and what they mean. So there's like a lot of work that needs to be done on that side of the canon that is also very important. But now I'll pass the microphone to Jewelle and to April.
April, do you want to?
Maria said everything I was thinking, but we discussed this a lot too between us. Like, as an artist, for me, I'm multicultural. So I have African-American family and I have Bahamian family. So I've struggled sometimes here in the US, which is where a lot of my practice is based, to translate the Bahamian code switching, so to speak, that happens in my work. And what's been happening recently, a good example of authentically diversifying would be to start from the board and work your way down, right? Because I can work with a curator who's from the Caribbean, who is supporting my work, but the people who fund it may not understand why I need to paint on a wall with 50 gallons of hair relaxer. Whereas if there were just one person on the board who's ever used hair relaxer, they could be like, oh, I totally understand this. It's very unique. This is where it could go. And I'm getting to the point now where I'm finding it difficult to work within institutions if I don't have that connection. Like working with Maria and other people that are from the same region or doing the research. Research also is a really big, that part I wish we could fund a little bit more, because at the very end of the day, that person that you're tokenizing, so to speak, if they're supported with research, at the very least, they can act as a functioning translator to the other parts of the institution, to be able to get others who aren't a part of that community to understand the importance of funding it. So yeah, but Maria said everything.
Well, I would echo what you're saying, certainly about board membership, getting representation on boards is really a significant step forward. But I would also say to individuals, becoming members of the organizations that you would like to see survive, and becoming members of organizations you think could be a little more diverse is important. You know, one, to have that financial support, and it doesn't cost that much to be a member of the museum, honestly. But it gives you a certain kind of voice if you are a member, and you can speak up in support of exhibits that are represented something you think is important, or you can speak up in complaint about exhibits that you think are faulty. I think that's really a big deal. And can I add something to what I just said a little bit earlier, to the person who was looking how to be an activist, continue to be an activist as an older person? I wanted to be more specific, because I think sometimes it's finding your activism around specific things that are important to you. It's not like you're just going to go run out and find some old people, but like, you know, if exercise or running was important to you in your youth, there are groups that are going to be your age that have that as significant. If visual arts is important to you and has been important, you're going to be able to find some people who are your age who are going to be activists and focused around that. Each of us have specific things that we're interested in that concern us. And being an activist as an older person around those specifics is valuable. And I think that's a little more helpful than saying, go out and find some old people.
I'll read one last question, and is by Richard Higginson. I think I'll read it, and I feel like we moved away from this, but it says, what term would you use, please? The CAM History Council feels that there is an inherent memory indoctrination of slavery within African Americans, which continues to persist today after generation of slavery indoctrination. So the question is, what term would you use, please?
I want to make sure I'm understanding, what term would we use for people who have been enslaved? I'm not quite sure I understand, because I know that now people are tending not to say slaves. They're putting the emphasis more on people who were enslaved.
Yeah, enslaved people.
Yeah, or enslaved people, so that it's not like there's this whole class of people who are slaves. No, it's a group of people who were made slaves. If that's the question, I'm not sure if that was really the question.
I'm not sure either. I don't know, Richard, if you want to type something to let us know. Yeah. In the meantime, I'll read another comment here. My partner and I, total Gilda nerds, are so excited listening to this and are sending love, power, and solidarity to you all. Just wanted to, but okay.
Well, I hope they get to come and see the exhibit. I can't wait to get to Los Angeles so I can actually see the manifestation of April's amazing mind.
Yes, come down. Yeah, come down.
Yeah, down.
I feel like that's the perfect place to wrap us. Maria, thank you for such a masterful leading of this discussion between two incredible minds and artists. Jewelle will definitely be keeping an eye out for that sequel. So we'll be looking forward to having you back in conversation for that book project. And of course, a huge congratulations to April. I hope all of you in the Los Angeles area really do get to come into CAM and see the work. The images online do not do it justice. I've been looking at images for months now and was blown away through install and through seeing it yesterday, fully open to the public. Really incredible show. Congratulations again. Hope all of you have a lovely evening, and we look forward to welcoming you back to CAM very, very, very soon. And if you're in Miami, check out Maria at PAM as well. They're open to the public. Everybody have a great night, and we look forward to seeing you.
Thank you.
You well. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.